Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome back to the Way of the Showman, where we view the world through the lens of showmanship. I am Captain Frodo, and I will be your gracious host and guide along this way. I have of late gone into a kind of, since the pandemic hit and I left Las Vegas and came back to Norway, I've gone into a period of intense creation. I created a solo show. I wrote all this material, this book, which I am currently going through in a conversational way with you. And this is the 20th, or actually the 21st of those episodes. So it's quite a lot of hours of material that I put together in trying to collate all my thoughts on all the aspects of what the way of the showman is, or what it means to be an enlightened or illuminated showman. If you have thought about all the aspects of what you do and thought, what is the best way of this or that? So that writing process and all of this, that all have been going on, as well as I've been, as you know, working with many different artists on some of them, and two shows of that I've talked about the most, the Reflex show and One Man Circus in Western Australia, but also working with individual acts, some that were working on projects that was going to go on TV, some that was making a new indoor thing after having done shows outside. So now it's just been an intense kind of time of creation, also arriving here in Norway after having done so many years of shows where I'm just doing the same few acts. It's like the same 20 minutes of material or so, roughly. I mean, there has been changes, but make a fine point of it. Doing the same material, 20 minutes divided up into two slots or whatever, for years and years, for like more than a decade. It is interesting to come back here, where if I want to not tour and I want to be in a small town on the west coast of Norway, I need to diversify to be able to remain in one spot. And that has been a very interesting and time-consuming project, to continuously have to redevelop and tune and diversify into different parts of my showmanship, which I hadn't developed before, doing longer sections of talking and being funny, which is sometimes called stand-up, but I thought of it first just as storytelling, but as each time I tell these stories, they become more and more funny because people expect me or want me to be funny, so I just look funny and talk funny, I guess. So that sort of develops material into here. And one of the things that has been very good here has been that I have been thriving on doing shows for families and for young people. But living in a small town, and I had sort of an hour's worth of material or so that I'd created for Circus Barnley in Denmark, together with Søren Østergaard, and Lena and Jenny and our excellent drummer Henning. We'd put together this material, which was mainly my material, and we sort of shaped it together. And now I'm making another one of those. I'm making 1 hour more, where I'm in certain sense ripping off my own structure of my family show, where I open with a kind of, it's Captain Frodo's Magic Circus. I open with a sort of circus act, the previous one where I juggled a little bit of a spatula and a knife and a wooden spoon, and then I do a balancing act with them afterwards. And now I'm doing another circus act. I'm doing a hat and cane act in the beginning. So I've been developing that, and I'm developing a new finale, something which hopefully can rival my sitting on the cans. And so then I'm like just basically involved in a deep kind of creation process. My dog is, if you hear some scratching in the background, it's because my dog has just decided that he wants to clean his fur on the carpet. Anyway, so I just found myself deeply involved in a creative process where I'm making a more or less 1 more hour of material and acts that some of the props my father has already made, and now I'm in this process where it's starting to really have sort of materialized, where I can write down the length of time that the different things are working, see the different aspects of the different things, and it's almost like each little thing is a song in an album. Each act is a song in an album, or a poem in a collection of poems. So you have the little acts, but then I'm looking, what is it that ties this show together? And I've now found a kind of backbone, so that there's one building towards a big stunt in the end, which the last show didn't do. It had more of a sort of developing theme of that I talked about through the acts that came to a conclusion in this Follow Your Dreams speech. But now I want to do something a little bit different there. I want to have a stunt that kind of builds up and sounds more and more impossible as I go towards the end, and then in the end I do that one big stunt. So I'm learning new skills. But the point with this is, it's a lonely affair to be a creator, to be creating something out of nothing, to know where these ideas come from and then find them and sort of bring them into existence. And one thing is to have them in existence sort of on paper or on my computer where I've written out the scripts and all this sort of stuff, but to actually make that so that I stand in my own room downstairs in the basement. Now I have a magic room where I can go and stand and work and have my stuff, but to go down there, to run through it again and again and again in front of a mirror and pretend that there are kids coming up and that what's working for the families, what's working for the... It is a hard and lonely affair. You need to take time off, and I'm doing that now. My family will be away for a couple of weeks, and I'm preparing to do this big family-style freak show in Rotterdam in the opening of May 2022. The early first few days there at the Circusstad Festival. So that's going to be exciting. And meanwhile, I'm now at home and I'm doing all these different things. So, yeah, it's all... just some reflections around. It's hard to, so you sit and you talk to a general person that I meet here. There's not so many artists that I converse with on a regular basis, and you go, oh yeah, I've been making a new show, and I go, oh okay, cool, yeah. And then they don't know how to approach that. And I guess because I've been living in this sort of bubble of touring with La Soirée and La Clique, or touring even before that in like the late 90s, early 2000s, that we were touring and going to festivals. So there was always lots of these artists around. So you can talk about this thing of creating something out of nothing, something very strange, like the things we get attracted to, like I'm doing a flea circus act or whatever now, and through some machinery and stuff that my father has built me, and I'm combining it with other things. So it's like this thing, like, where is it? How is it presented? What am I saying? What are the, like, that stuff that you pull out, but then once you start to, it's such a nebulous process. Anyway, I'm talking to you about it because there's not so many people out there to talk to. But enough about this. This is just how I am, but it is a small mirror of the creative process for everybody. We're all sort of a little bit lost, and I can't help but feel a little bit sort of, feel like you're wasting time. I'm just sitting staring in the wall and mulling over ideas, so I'm not even like specifically working on it, but it's all kind of percolating away, and now it is happening. It's happening in my mind, and I got the first few acts where I performed my Hat and Cane act the other day, and we'll do it again on Thursday. So it's the things are coming out of creation and out into, going from creation into sort of practice, and now some of these acts are now gone over into the rehearsal stage, so I'm running them. Anyway, that's what's going on in my world. Now, let's move on to the world of ideas, where we are going to, after having looked at the audience last time, we are now looking at one more aspect of the audience, and I'm going to tell you all about it just after this. Check your attitude, or what is your attitude? Does it need adjustment? Do you even know that you have an attitude? This is about that, but we'll get to it in a roundabout way. Now, as I go about my daily business of life, I am, as we all are, in a constant stream of impressions, encounters from without and from within, dings on my phone and beeps and alerts and emails and mail and alarms going off to remember meetings. So some elements come from the world, my outer geographies, and some elements like ideas and attractions come from within myself, my inner geography. And if I pay a particular kind of attention, the kind that comes natural when I sit and watch the sea or walk in nature, or just in general let myself take a break from overstimulation, I become aware of things and processes, symbols or systems which are influencing a pull on me. I often find that I've been writing about certain things in my notebooks, thinking about it repeatedly, as well as seeing it or things related to it in my readings. So I'm reading something and all of a sudden it sparks an idea, and then I read something else sort of unrelated or completely unrelated, and I start seeing that same thing. When this starts to happen, I know a strange attractor has emerged into my reality. And at some point, maybe around 2009, I began to pay this kind of attention to my audience. I had already become dimly aware back then that my audience was a part of myself, as I've sketched out for you in previous episodes, but now I began to notice and single out something more, something that I hadn't really been aware of as a thing in itself. I began to notice my attitude towards them. I had noticed them, the audience, as a point or a thing in the world, a point or node of interest. But now I was beginning to sort of discern the actual relationship between us. That is, my focus moved towards the spaces between, the relationships themselves, rather than the elements relating. And what was this relationship? And now that I became aware of it, how would I approach the relationship between myself and my audience? What was my attitude? Because I'd always, of course, had an attitude, but it had gone relatively unexamined. And once I was aware of my attitude, it became something I could cultivate. And this cultivation has eventually ended up being a sort of great personal help and comfort. And the attitude and its effect on myself was something I experienced particularly deep during the 1 year or even more, like 1 year or more of sort of absence of audiences throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, when it was so abruptly it just all disappeared, these connections that I had with them, and as a result these attitudes that I had towards them. It was something that I was missing. Now, when I try to unearth my earliest thoughts about my relationships with an attitude towards the audience, the best I can find are just feelings. I'm fleshing these feelings out now with thoughts and images as I'm sort of saying these things, but it's like I was just a kid. The very early times, like a young teenage and punk even for a while, and I was living through it and practicing tricks and skills and participating in all the many varieties of performance opportunities that my dad, the great Santini, could drum up for us. This was what happened in the beginning, even before I did street shows. And the earliest memory of this feeling is back in my deep history of my performance career. That was from when I was transitioning from being an assistant in my dad's show to something more. And I have fragmentary memories of being maybe 13 years old or so, like around 1989. I was tied up in a straitjacket with the music from the latest installment of the Indiana Jones franchise, the Indiana Jones and Last Crusade. And I was using that to sort of back up my escape performance from the straitjacket. Now, the memory that I have goes something like this. Like, I'm looking out at an audience of men sitting behind tables after having finished their dinner. I'm standing on the floor. There's no stage. I'm strapped up and wrapped tightly in a specially fitted child-sized straitjacket. And in the memory, I am having a powerful feeling of thankfulness or gratitude. Yeah, and that's it. It's just me standing all tied up, looking at the audience midway, through an act, with a feeling of being grateful of them, grateful to them. however you say that. Now the feeling is strong and crystal clear, but it remains just a sort of picture, like from a roll of film where only one picture wasn't destroyed by sunlight, like where there's just one picture left on the whole roll of film. And it's like the strangest thing, a little flash of memory fished up out of an ocean of forgotten events and details. Like in hindsight, I think it might have been at a show my father and I did for a Rotary club, and I was probably going through a hormonal teenage change and had been having some difficulty getting behind performing magic tricks with feather flowers and sponge eggs and whatever. And there was something about performing a straitjacket which felt more authentic to me in a way that I hadn't felt for a long time about performing magic. There is, of course, a lot of change going on in a teenage boy's body around those times. Pimples in full bloom, your body is literally changing, and with these bodily changes there are also massive changes happening in your mind, and with that comes changes in your self-identity. And the changes often start earlier, but at 13 it's usually well underway. So the moment in the straitjacket that I remember is to me one of those odd glimpses where I've felt in touch with my little candle, where I could see, so to speak, the flame's little light, like the way had dropped away for me for a while, and all of a sudden my little flame was lighting up the path ahead of me for me to reconnect with the way of the Showman. And my little light shone just bright enough to show me the way ahead. I'd been performing all the while, but even whilst performing I had been a little lost, like I was in the right place but not doing quite the right thing. And escaping from the straitjacket was also the first act I performed that used my flexibility, which much later would become the backbone of my signature acts and my next identity, going from no longer being a magician or even then I transitioned into a juggler, but this was the first steps towards my identity as the incredible rubber man. It was the shape of things to come, the emergence of an artist, and the moment when the assistant in the show got the calling to take the center stage. It was the moment when the crowd's reactions felt more real, more deserved, like they really were for me, like they not just because I was my father's assistant performing my father's craft of magic and tricks that he instructed me in or whatever, but I was becoming someone who had found a way of their own. And feelings are like poetry in that they're immediate and slippery at the same time. I know the truth of that feeling of gratitude, but in trying to express it to you, I can only do so by sort of translating it into thoughts. And this crystallized moment is probably a construction in my mind shaped by the malleability of the human memory, but nonetheless it's real for me. And that gig that happened, the memory is, of course, famously very plastic and can't be trusted. And each time a memory is retrieved and brought into conscious focus, it gets colored with the emotional valence of the moment of retrieval. I mean, if you're angry when you think about something from your past, that memory now becomes tinged with that anger. And whenever you're thinking about a memory, you are also changing it. But that said, whether this memory and a real life event is 100% real, or whether I am engaged with mythopoetic personal myth-making, it is one of those incidents that called me to have a deeper conversation with myself and my role and place in the world. I was then already finding a way to a more authentic expression of myself. So even though this happened, like this is a long time ago, and it was then spurred on by this I mentioned, like in 2009, where I'll get more to that, but I was in London at that time when this was happening. But yeah, so this goes either further back, but it's sort of like I've become aware of it, and then once I've become aware of something, a strange attractor, something is pulling my attention to it through many different mediums, and I see it in the world and I start to see it in myself, then I go through a sort of self-exploration of going, where does this come from? What is this? What is that connected to? Anyway, in that memory moment, the powerful gratitude, thankfulness came from the realization that I could only ever have found my calling by being in front of them, the audience. I understood that they were the ones who made me the showman at least as much as I was making it myself, and for that I was thankful. So that was to sort of see I started to see this kind of connection. I'm 100% sure that I'm just making this stuff up now as I'm talking to you, and as I was thinking about it before, like the image is just there and everything else is just extrapolation. But be that as it may, it is the start of these thoughts that I have about gratitude. My specific experience of thankfulness was more than a sort of passive response to that the sort of Rotary Club gave me. It was greater than that. It was like I had woken up whilst in the midst of already paying attention to them and them paying attention to me. Like I'd woken up whilst doing a show. In a flash, I experienced how the moment lined up what was inside of me with what was in the world outside of me. It wasn't just a feeling I got after it was all over. It was a lived experience of a real moment. The feeling was not just a feeling produced by the moment. It was a separate, real thing in the world, a feature of paying proper attention. Something that had been there all along was coming into focus. I saw a deep interconnectedness, how so many things came together in a living, breathing network of interaction for me in a show, for a show to happen, and for me to express myself. I was discovering myself and my relationship to the world. Now, these days, I think of this as a kind of ecological insight, that to see myself as part of a vast web or network. The endless sort of interconnectedness of everything produces everything from the air we breathe and the food we eat and the water we drink to an individual's opportunities for self-realization. The experiencing of this interconnectedness is to know we are not separate. And when contemplating how interwoven and dependent we are on everything, it can be rightfully experienced as gratitude or awe. That's how it's just all so epic and so crazy how it's all connected, and going like this has an immensity that is so big that it feels like the appropriate response to it is just to marvel at its complexity. And from this emotional seed of gratitude, I think I grew into a fully fledged showman. I took the center stage by getting my own acts, which were now not reliant on my dad. My teenage rebellion was to steer away from magic and into circus and sideshow. And the intimidation I felt by the level of deception and magic was too much for me when I was hanging out with the punks and hippies who were my friends. Circus skills were more real. There was no tricking in the circus tricks. I could do it without needing to keep a secret. In fact, sharing the secrets with all the people that you met, like this is how you juggle, this is how you do the balancing of this thing. That was kind of become part of it, what was good about it. Before finishing school and leaving for university in the bustling metropolis of Oslo, with its 500,000 inhabitants, which was a crazy amount compared to the 25,000-30,000 that lived in Haugesund. I had a few juggling acts, some magic acts I could still perform without feeling teenage shame, as well as fire eating and breathing, and I also stuck pins and needles through my flesh and a spoon up my nose, and I had my straitjacket escape. Finishing 12 years of school, I moved into my first apartment in Sveigårdsgata in Oslo. I found myself relatively alone in a huge city, but found my tribe in fellow jugglers and fakirs and circus performers. And together with a whole lot of circus punks and good people, we juggled regularly in a park close to the Munch Museum, Edvard Munch, the artist of Scream fame. And as I got to know all these jugglers, so they weren't, almost said performers, but they weren't performers, they're jugglers first and foremost. I realized that I was really good at something which a whole lot of these cool guys and girls wanted to be good at, which was amazing, because I had not really known anyone else my age who shared my passion for circus. So to the budding jugglers in Oslo, I came out of nowhere already sort of formed. Haugesund in the mid-90s was, at least by circus standards, the middle of nowhere. I arrived on the scene in Oslo, not just with decent juggling skills, but with more stage experience and grasp of good old-fashioned showmanship than most. And I had already done hundreds of shows at this point with Santini's magic show. So my next important memory in this check your attitude thing, the expansion of this attitude, is this memory fragment comes from performing with that juggling group. This is how it's connected to this, but which was called Baller I Lufta, Balls in the Air. And we had performed at an outdoor rock festival outside Oslo, where it really had become clear to me how little experience most of the other jugglers had in working with crowds and in general showmanship. And as long as we had been just practicing in the park, everyone was kind of equal in a way. But when you step in front of an audience to show your skills, you see who, on top of being able to do difficult tricks or whatever, can sell those to the audience. And in that selling or whatever, you are connecting with an audience. And the freeform show had already started when I sort of stepped up and took control, not of the show, but of the crowd. And I brought the crowd in closer, forming a circle around us, and hyped them up and got them involved, which we spoke a bit about last time, this thing of turning them into an audience and that. Essentially turning them from passers-by into an audience. And this was the first time my performance skills were like fully appreciated by a group of my peers. And it felt like an initiation. After that, I was a made man. I was in. A friend of ours, as the mobsters might say. But that wasn't the point. After the festival was over, when we walked through the sort of heaving throng, moving like the river through the festival gates, heading to the trains as the festival was done, which would take all us jugglers back to Oslo and all of the punters as well, all the revelers and party goers to the festival. And along the way, I became separated from my juggling troupe and found myself caught in a big group of drunk college boys. And I guess I was a college boy myself, taking the preparatory studies in philosophy and logic and history of philosophy and whatever. So I was at uni, and me too, but these were of a different type, in sailor shoes with white polo shirts and blazers over their shoulders, and they were richer and fancier, or at least dressing to appear so. And something in their state of intoxication and their state of entitled emotion, coupled with my aloneness, scared me. A moment before, it was my ability to connect to a group of strangers that had defined me, and now, in this unstructured flow of revelers, they appeared very different. Like somewhere from the sunny field of the festival to this tarmac road leading to the train station, they had turned from dogs to wolves, and their looks and negative interest was turning on me. I was intimidated and afraid, and I hurried on, and not long after I found my colourful gang of jesters and circus punks, and together we boarded the waiting train. And then we got on the train, and as I remember it now, there was not so much talking going on. The train was very full, and as I sat there, heart finally sort of calming after getting away from the wolves, I had another one of those feelings, like I was looking at the festival crowd filling up the train to the brink. And when I again had this sort of intense experience of gratitude, I again became deeply aware that all of those people in the summer dresses and in ridiculous soft oversized festival hats with sunburned hands and tired smiles on their faces was the ones who had made me. Like I was sitting with my circus gang with a newfound status and respect from my crew after the shows we had done that day. And they weren't just meaning the crowd, the audience, the people, the random passers-by, the muggles. They weren't just affording me to be a showman and do shows, they also enabled me to have the time of my life and made me feel like I belonged somewhere, not to them, but sort of, or amongst them, but amongst those who faced the other way, with skills to show. The difference was that this time the gratitude was tinged with a weary kind of apprehension. The episode with the wolves in the rich boy's clothes stirring inside me as a warning. Now the crowd was also a formidable beast that one would do well to approach with caution. So that's like an odd kind of memory. It feels a little odd to sort of say it like that, because it's all of these things are a little bit old and a little bit non-specific. I don't have any details of it written down in diaries, or so. I did start keeping some diaries that I've found now that I've moved back home. I found a sort of little suitcase full of notes and diaries from, but that's not until a bit later that starts happening. So, but anyway, it's this sort of thing where you have these sort of images where you go, yeah, I remember that, and just like in a dream, you go, I don't know how exactly we ended up with this or with that, but anyway, the gratitude sort of grows along the way here in this. Not just that it grows, that it becomes more and more of that one thing, but it's just my understanding of it. And as I'm looking back, I'm going like, what is this relationship between us when we start to focus on the relationship and not just them as an entity standing in front of me? So this kind of episode on the going down to the train, we'll leave that rather unspecific as to exactly what happened, but the episode had shown me the sort of beastly nature of the crowd. It had brought a healthy fear or a different kind of respect into the mix of my emotions and attitude towards my audience. And as these two feelings come together, gratitude transforms into awe. Awe is described in dictionaries as a feeling of reverential respect, but it's tinged with fear and wonder. When I look back at it and just looking at those words of like having met those guys, become a bit nervous because there's like here comes some weird dude looking like a hippie with juggling clubs in his hands, and it becomes a sort of this like that was there's this sort of genuine kind of fear in there, but it's also this sort of wonder of them having made it. So to me, just when I'm reading that, it just has, that's pretty much those experiences map perfectly on top of this thing with fear and wonder and the reverential respect then that comes first in the definition is maybe the last thing to arrive or so. But for me, it's sort of, this is all ticking up to this reverence. Because like we feel awe, for instance, when we look up at the billions of shimmering stars in the night dark sky, when we can feel awe when we stand in the presence of a child being born. It's not fear like we usually think of it, yet it pushes some of those same buttons. Like you can, watching the sky, you can sort of fall and disappear into it. Like I've had experiences like that. And having a child being born, like this immense sense of purpose and responsibility taps into something which is so hardwired in us that it's overwhelming. But still, when I was holding my daughter in my arms when she'd been born and my wife was still being finished up in surgery or whatever after having a cesarean, it was like I felt like I was just about to crumble and come completely undone, yet this little thing just demanded that you step up. So yeah, it's reverence. It's tinged with awe, but it is also got fear and all sorts connected to it. Big emotions. So anyway, the best way that I then have found is to describe this feeling and attitude as reverence, and it's a deep respect tinged with awe. And reverence often is thought of as a religious kind of emotion, a state of pure veneration, and I don't mind that. I don't shy away from invoking the sacred aspect of reverence, but it's that's the kind of difference or whatever. I'm thinking when I am thinking in what I think of as religious, it is with a deep respect for the sacred, whatever that may be, not specifically towards any kind of supernatural entity. But physical responses to experiencing sort of reverence can be like what we do when we face something, when we feel reverence. It can be to bow your head or curtsy or to bend your knees and prostrate oneself. These are appropriate gestures when facing or showing reverence. As performers, we bow our heads a lot. We take a bow. How different does your bow feel if you bow with reverence as opposed to pride? You should be proud to have performed your act, but ending with reverence as opposed to pride changes your experience. A simple thing like the subtle attitude expressed in the bow can be read and understood by the audience. And this is at least a potential, because reverence, like attention, can go both ways. Maybe they can read it, the subtle things, and I think they can. We are exquisitely tuned to read subtleties of body language and facial expressions. If you meet your crowd in reverence, there is a good chance they will mirror your attitude. To experience reverence flowing both ways, emanating from yourself and coming towards you, is an extraordinary human experience which validates your existence and places you in deep connection with the world. So now we're moving this, looking just at the relationship and seeing if you can feel it, then can we specifically sort of aim at take the audience from wonder to awe, with a tinge of fear, getting the how do we deal with an emotion that's so big like reverence? So speaking of kind of mirroring, my journey from thankfulness inside a straitjacket to nurturing reverence as a general attitude is an aspect of this deepening personal relationship to my craft of showmanship. And upon contemplation, I find that this deepening and development of my state of mind, it sort of mirrors what I want the audience to go through when they watch my show. So let me sketch out how I picture an ideal inner experience for an audience. Of course, these days, a lot of people, myself included, we spend all moments which does not call for my explicit attention looking at our phones. If this is the case, then any preparatory frames of mind will be hard to control. Be that as it may, in a more ideal setting, I think it is likely that at least some of the spectators experience a kind of thankfulness or gratitude when they gather to see a show, like a concert or a Harry Potter musical, like we talked about last time, talking about how being an audience member is a kind of it's a gracious act. You are opening yourself up, and they're likely to sort of be happy that they got to get tickets, or even just happy that this particular artist chose to come to their city, or just pleasantly happy that a complete whim brought them in to sit and watch the show, and they wonder what's going to happen. After that, I imagine that my sort of audience, begins to wonder. Like I said, now wonder has a sort of several meanings, and one is the feeling that we get when something beautiful, unexpected, or mysterious happens, and it's not sort of presenting itself as a threat. When that then I go, oh, it's wonderful. There's something wondrous about a rainbow. And this feeling is more powerful if you see it together with a young child. It's so normal, yet seeing a rainbow, yet whenever we see one, we're still filled with a desire to sort of share the experience. People look around to see if there's anyone else who's seeing this rainbow right now. Like, we want to share wonder. And I believe this is one of the reasons we human beings have such a strong urge to gather, and through shared attention, then because we can experience wonder, we can have these emotions that just come through the shared experience, or these kind of experiences wants us to share them. That's like two sides to the same coin. And the feeling is often described as being sort of wonder is to be filled with admiration and amazement. Now, the second meaning of the word of wonder is to wonder about something, or to curiously speculate. And when an audience sits in the big top waiting for the show to start, I imagine that they do so with a wondering attitude. Like, I know they certainly do before a concert or a show. Like, oh, I wonder what they're going to do in the show, or I wonder if he'll manage to do what they showed on the poster, or I wonder which songs they're going to play if it's a band. Maybe some of them wonders whether the experience will be worth the money they spent for the tickets, if you've been brought along by your partner to see something or whatever. I think both of these meanings apply to our audience as they wait for the event to happen, and it will sort of hopefully grow and intensify as the show begins. This would be great if this happened, I think. Socrates, the philosopher, he believed that the way to wisdom began in wonder. And without a sense of wonder and wondering, we can't expect to be able to learn from and openly meet the world. Wonder is a kind of curiosity, and without it, we're closed off within ourselves. It is through curiosity and wonder that we extend ourselves outside ourselves. It's what brings us into connection with the world. And what better state to be in at the start of a show? Whether this happens or not is an entirely different matter. Yet, because I know that I really want this to be the case, I can actively cultivate it to facilitate and instill this and to encourage it happening using my creativity, and to also plan the audience's experience as they wait to enter my show world. And this can have an endless amount of practical manifestations, like which venue I choose, the music played whilst they're waiting, the way the entrance is decorated, what's played on the video screens in the theater, if you choose to do that stuff, or what's said about the show in the advertising, the images on the poster, what's reflected on there, the props that are standing on the stage will cause speculation. They see it all as they're sitting there or whatever, if they're not looking at their phones. But these are just a few sort of ideas which can help, of the things which can sort of help guide the audience into a certain receptive state before I even get to interact with them directly. And this is, of course, another aspect is to physically be there. So the show starts as soon as they interact with you, but that the show proper, where you go onto the stage and go, "Hi, now I'm addressing you all." You can do pre-show, whether you're out in the foyer dressed in a costume so they don't know that it's you, or they can feel like they're meeting you. You can stand there and greet everyone on the way in. Anyway, and an interesting thing about awe and reverence is that these experiential phenomena have a powerful ability to pull us out of our egocentrism. One who stands in reverence before an immense mountain or an ancient sacred icon carved from wood forgets about themselves for a bit. Time ceases to move normally as the moment collapses or explodes, depending. As an important side note, this diminishing consciousness awareness of ourselves is also a core feature of play. We've talked about this before, and we're talking about shows, so we see this mirroring on this thing, and one overall strange attractor in this entire second season, which looks like it will have been going every second week for a year. It will be by the end of it. We will see that play, as in awe and reverence, we sort of lose ourselves in the experience at varying degrees, and we will arrive at play and playfulness and connection as the very core human ideals, both with what we do and possibly in all of human existence. So it's pretty grand, but just keep putting a pin in play, and the aspects of what exactly play is, and what a show is, and what a religious experience is, and what a truly good encounter with another person, getting into a conversation, for instance, or how these all will see it at when you look at the descriptions of they are all eerily similar. Now, awe makes us feel humbled. It triggers the kind of feeling that we get in the presence of something vast that challenges our understanding of the world, or puts us in our place, making us see ourselves as small parts of a bigger picture. Yet to know one's place in the world is a valuable realization in itself. From this exact place you find yourself, however insignificant, and this is the only place from which you can participate in the world and potentially then create some changes. So let's look at another personal sort of moment of reverence. I'm sort of picking out these moments of my biography or whatever, even though I mentioned sort of first that I became aware of this in 2009. That was when when I was performing with La Clique at the Hippodrome at Leicester Square in London, where just as the recession was hitting and some of the bigger shows were closing down, our show just kept extending and selling tickets, and we were just so grateful. And I was standing behind a curtain there, or whatever. There wasn't like what was then effectively like the backstage, just every day warming up and just listening to the crowd. So that's where the first thing, and then we end up with this train story, and now this. Like, I had another true moment of sort of reverence for me, unrelated to showbiz. This was back in 2006. This was also with La Clique. It's in New York City, and we were there performing with Ross Mollison, from Spiegelworld, when La Clique was called Absinthe for that season. And anyway, the experience didn't happen there. It happened in New York City at the Natural History Museum, so the American Museum of Natural History. And as I pushed through the doors of this place, I was quite literally taken aback by the sight. Like, the rotunda has a formidable display of 3 mounted dinosaurs. 2 of them are the classic sort of long neck dinosaurs, or sauropods as they're called, and the largest of those is a Barosaurus mother, rearing up on her hind legs to protect her still massive yet tiny compared to her Barosaurus child. And the mounted skeleton of the mother Barosaurus is the world's tallest freestanding dinosaur on display. And this display is just so truly epic and awe-inspiring. And me being deeply interested in deep time and being more interested in dinosaurs than it's cool to admit, it was just blowing me away. And the reason that the mother is then rearing up on her hind legs is that there's a massive Allosaurus, which is the kind of T-Rex looking dinosaur that existed before the T-Rex came into being. And he has just got his skeleton eyes fixed on the Barosaurus mother's giant baby. And I am not a religious man in any normal sense of the word, but in meeting this grand display, in the gorgeous architectural surroundings of what I've later found out is called the Theodore Roosevelt Rotunda, it moved me to tears. The place, the epic display, more than 15 meters high, the depiction of struggle for survival, the immensity of the deep chasm of time separating my existence from theirs, the fact that these bones existed to be mounted at all, and the prodigious effort to find them, excavate them, and on top of this, the artistry of creating this wonderful, awe-inspiring exhibit all hit me like an emotional ton of bricks. And I was moved, and I was awed, and I could not adequately describe this in any sort of secular language. I really needed religious vocabulary to express the immensity of my emotion. I was having a peak experience, as Abraham Maslow calls it. I was experiencing true reverence. I mean, this was much more powerful than standing at the Rotary thing, which is just this embryonic part of it. But to me, time was woven into the experience of this reverence. The deep geological time, literally like 160 million years, was a significant part of what added depth to my experience. Through this, though this is not the only kind of time that I'm thinking of, I am thinking of taking time to experience. Like, I had taken time to leave my apartment. I was alone. I'd gotten onto the subway, and I arrived with great anticipation. I was wondering what it would be like. The Natural History Museum in New York is a formidable institution, much like the Natural History Museum in London, where I have also spent considerable time. And the process of taking time for something is a necessary step. Take time to take in whatever it might be. An exhibit, a piece of music, a piece of cheese, or for our purpose here, the process of showmanship. So that's like a massive episode of reverence, and reverence comes with time. There's all just a day of stories today. And many years ago, my good friend Hamish McCormick and his son, which is my godson, Otto, came for a visit. At the time, my wife and I were staying with her father. My father-in-law has an incredible property deep in the historic goldfields of Victoria in Australia. And his house is situated on top of a little mountain, and the views are astounding. And as we came around the house from where Hamish had parked his car, and the gorgeous sort of panoramic vista opened up, green fields, rolling hills, and trees as far as the eye could see, Hamish exclaimed, "Oh, wow, look at that view!" And his son, Otto, immediately thrilled and afraid to miss whatever exciting sight could have triggered such a response in his dad, almost shouted, "Where? Where?" his head swiveling around, trying to follow his dad's gaze with growing frustration as he failed to discover anything exciting. All he could see was just rolling hills, grass, fields, trees, and way off in the distance some cows and a little village, or so little, I think it's just a post office and some stuff, but whatever. What was this elusive view shouted about? And once he had looked around and it's been explained, it's like going, yeah, not very much. Actually, it's apparently a view is not very much of much interest to a kid like that. So arriving at this state of reverence needs a certain amount of peace and quiet, and it might actually, the reason I'm saying this, I think it might be more sort of adult experience. This is purely speculative, but it feels right to me. Like time need to have passed, and you need to be beyond that sort of immediacy of perception and participation that you have when you're a kid. So, what can we say about achieving reverence? Like, I find the immediacy of a room full of strangers gathered to take in my show that this is a wonderful focus for the kind of attention needed to achieve reverence. And this is what I was then talking about a little bit with in 2009, being in the Hippodrome, watching this crowd through the curtains. And they're all sitting there in the dark, and more often than not, they're in neat, ordered rows with big smiles on their faces, and their excitement is contagious. Like, I still do it to this day. I sneak up to a place where I can see them, and sometimes I'm aided by listening to classical music on my headphones, which is usually in sharp contrast to whatever blaring high-octane circus music is being played out in the auditorium. It certainly was for 12 years with La Soirée. And I look at them and I try to stop thinking. I try to start feeling. I let the music move me whilst watching the crowd. I have a penchant for Johann Sebastian Bach. Recently it's been Viking or Olafsson's piano rendition of Bach's fourth organ sonata, and this seems to hit a sort of particularly rich vein of illumination in me. But I try to see the situation beyond the endless minutiae of life and work, see the situation for the exquisite process of experience it is. Let myself be lifted up and behold the way it all swirls around in a dance of perfection. Let the details disappear in the flow, discover my own reverence for being a part of this extraordinary situation. A little time of reverence before every show adds up by the end of the year to a lot. And a quick contemplation of your act, of your situation, your dependence on the audience for this to be possible is a good step on the path towards reverence. If you do it, and as you're still sort of rushing from having shown your act, I've got to flip through that memory and this realization as well. This can help sort of link the immediacy of ecstasy of an act well performed by you and well received by the audience with everything connected to making it happen. And the immediacy of the experience overcomes the audience showman duality. The thumping heart, the feeling of completion, of performed purpose, feeds the merging of you, your thinking and feeling, with the others, the audience, uniting you with something greater than yourself. And in everyday life, focusing your thinking into a reverential mode is a good path for developing this attitude. It's something you already know, but with the practice, it becomes something that you can invoke at will. For this, thinking is a good way to start. Thinking is a good way to start most things. And when you're hit by annoying thoughts and feelings like someone cutting you off in traffic or you missed a bus, force yourself to change your thinking. Search for something greater. a more elevated point of view. Take the time to think. The human faculty of thinking, perhaps uniquely so, can transform our relationship to the world. We can, to a great extent, guide our feelings about something, like how the pain you feel after a hard workout session is sore, but you still don't mind it because it's rooted in something healthy, whilst if you woke up and felt that agonizing burn and ache as part of some illness, then that pain would be awful and you could hardly bear it. But if we contemplate and contemplatively apply this mind power to our craft and our audience, we can learn to produce a state of reverence almost on command. Because as you explore the relationship in your mind, you are educating your mind. What you think has a real impact on the wiring of your brain, and the habits you have in thinking are just as powerful and creates just as real neural pathways in your brain as learning how to play the piano. Learning how to play the piano literally changes your brain. Neural pathways reorganizes and grows in response to your activity. And the reason repetition makes things easier for you is that your brain rewires itself. Myelin is formed around neurons, and the struggle sort of eventually disappears and a new reality emerges, a new kind of freedom. Just like learning how to play the piano or learning how to bring on a certain state of mind. They're both skills. And at first it's hard to make it happen, and after a while it gets easier and it becomes a natural extension of you and your pre-show preparations. So if you stick with this learning the piano analogy, you go from having to will each finger to move at the right time to the right key on the piano to a focus on expressing the incredible depth of emotion in the music itself, which is arguably the very point of the music. Now, if we apply that to us performing our acts, we don't just do each sort of move or tricks for its own sake, or even our own sake, like that we do it for us, but we do it to produce a powerful and emotional experience for our audience. By taking a few moments before I go on stage to check my attitude, I immediately know if I am ready. And if I'm not, I can, almost always, arouse the necessary state of mind. And once this attitude has permeated me, the feeling has become true in me, it alters the way that I perform, in shows and in life alike. If the feeling fills the rest of me, then my words, my actions, and slapstick and confetti throws, all this, it all sort of falls into line in the service of connection with my audience. Now, this is such a long diatribe that I'm going to go on that we're going to end it here. And next week we're going to start up talking more about what you want your audience to feel and ways that you can then start implementing this or making that happen, taking the moves towards that happening. So, until next time. But this is not the end of the episode. I'm going to do a little wrap up in a minute, just after this. Alright, once you start telling some stories about yourself and all that, then time just flies. Instead of me just saying, this is what I think, putting some stories in there. It takes time, but hopefully it sort of illustrates it, and it also shows this way that it's important to think back at your life sometimes and try to work out, like, why am I the way that I am? And those diaries that I spoke about before, like, looking in those, I see that some of these things that I'm talking about to you here, they really go back a very long time. But anyway, it has been a pleasure taking this little leg of the journey with you. As always, please share this podcast. It would be great if every single one of you out there shared it and even tagged me in it, or used the hashtag theWay of the Showman in something on Instagram. Then maybe we could drum up some more enthusiasm from more people. I'm really appreciating you being there. And there's lots of ways to support the podcast that you can read about on wherever you find your podcasts. buymeacoffee.com/CaptainFrodo, or just tell a friend. That's the best way to do it. really. Anyway, until next time, I would just like to say take care of yourself and those you love, and I hope to see you along the way.